This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.
If we look at the modern Azores, we find some rather interesting correlations between, and you know, the book that I would write on this will go into we have all the references and actually much more detail because we've skipped a lot of stuff here. We don't necessarily need to go into every aspect of this, just to make the point, which I hope is the takeaway from this, is that, come on, let's get back to what Plato actually says and see if that has merit, see if that holds up under scrutiny. If it doesn't, let's just dispense with the idea of Atlantis and say the skeptics were right, that it was just a metaphorical invention of his to describe his concept of the idealized state. But if we start going in every other direction around the world, you know, the question we've got to ask is, how far can we deviate from the details, the very precise details of his narrative, and still legitimately call it Atlantis?
Yeah,
I think that's the point here. That
well, one of the things that really interests me about looking at Plato's idea of Atlantis, and in us doing all this work and showing all these things and saying, okay, so if we do give it credence, then what I want to do after that is look at the Egyptians, because they were where, if the story is given credence and we look at what Plato said was true, he says it came from the Egyptians. So then we need to look at their stuff and see what they said. And of course, you have the pyramid texts detailing, you know, kings going back 40, 50,000, 60,000 years. So that's what I would want to do next, is look at what the Egyptians said, because that's the source.
That's the source.
How much is left of those Egyptian writings, though? Because so much was destroyed in the destruction of the library at Alexandria.
Yeah, much of it was destroyed. We have the pyramid texts and the Edfu building texts that refer to periods supposedly going back that far, and that's about it, as far as I know.
What I'm hoping is that somewhere awaiting discovery is a hidden cache of ancient texts.
Yes, find it.
Yeah. Mike, could you get on that for us?
I'll work on that, yeah.
Report back next week if you find anything.
Donate to Randall's Patreon.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some interesting genetic research. We won't get into that yet. But let's look at some of Plato's actual some of the quotes from Plato's Timaeus and Critias. So let's see. Yes, so here we go. Poseidon, receiving for his lot the island of Atlantis, begat children by a mortal woman, and settled them in a part of the island which I will describe. Looking towards the sea, but in the center of the whole island, there was a plain, which is said to have been the fairest of all plains and very fertile. Right? So, and Poseidon himself set in order with ease, as a god would, the central island, bringing up from beneath the earth 2 springs of water, the one flowing warm from its source, the other cold. In the next place they had fountains, one of cold and another of hot water, in gracious plenty flowing, and wonderfully adapted for use by reason of the pleasantness and excellence of the waters. So he makes repeated reference to these springs and how there was actually a springs that issued from the earth that flowed hot and cold. When we look at which is important geologically, and when we look at Furnas and São Miguel, let us do a screen share here, and we see that this important geological detail is recapitulated in the modern day Azores. So here, coming from the left, we have a hot spring, and from the right, up above, we have the cold spring, flowing up from two distinct aquifers beneath the island, coming up, and here's the hot water flowing out, the cold water flowing out.
Wow.
So there's a very interesting geological detail, just as Plato describes it.
Come on, there's hot and cold springs in the recat structure.
Oh, is there?
No,
Oh.
I don't think so.
I
think it's pretty dry.
Pretty bone dry. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably is. Yes. Okay. And let's see. Okay, so then it says that these were surrounded with buildings and with plantations of trees, such as suited the waters. Also, they made cisterns, some open to the heavens, others roofed over to be used in winter as warm baths. And we can go here and we'll share, and we'll see that
Wow.
Here's the hot springs. You can see the steam rising up. And just as in Plato's day, they now have created cisterns where people can take warm baths with the hot water naturally flowing out of the ground.
Beautiful.
And they have they're bringing the waters down from the highlands into the plain. And just as Plato describes, you have a mountain range to the north and a fertile plain to the south. And when we look at the southern part of the island, we see very fertile plain leading down to the ocean.
Oh yeah.
We see lakes that have very interesting legends associated with them about lost civilizations. And the idea of the two springs of water, which we just saw, and the cisterns, the hot springs that are coming up very much just like Plato described, on hot springs on San Miguel. And then he says, and making every variety of food to spring up abundantly from the soil, which is what you expect from volcanic soil. It's highly fertile. So the Azores today are very fertile, and abundant food in the markets, that grows from this volcanic soil. And whatever fragrant things there now are in the earth, whether roots or herbage or woods or essences which distill from fruit and flower, grew and thrived in that land, just as it does in the Azores today. Now, to me, this is very interesting. He describes how on the northern part of the islands, where you had the mountain ranges, they constructed a vast complex of canals and aqueducts to bring the water to the south, to the low-lying fertile plain, which was to the south, sheltered again from the north. We saw last week how the Gulf Stream wrapped right around the plateau region, right? And then again, you would have had the mountain range to the north, which would have also helped to shelter it, open to the south, which would have almost created like a natural passive solar collection topography. So he describes how they built a series of aqueducts to bring down the water. On Madeira, we see a system where they've basically created, sort of in miniature, exactly what Plato describes, with these aqueducts that are called levadas. And so as it says, again, quoting from Plato, of the water which ran off, they carried some to the grove of Poseidon, where were growing all manner of trees of wonderful height and beauty, owing to the excellence of the soil. They harvested their crops twice a year. In the winter season, they relied on the water of Zeus-sent rains. And in the summer season, they used the water stored in the earth, drawing it into their canal system to irrigate the crops. And this shows the modern aqueduct system on the island of Madeira, the levadas, and they crop the land twice a year, making use of the rains from heaven in the winter, conducting the streams from the aqueducts. That's the whole point here. And so in this particular system, this is actually now turned into be a rather a tourist attraction, in the sense that what people do now, and I guess when we organize our field trip, our Atlantis field trip, we'll have to do this as well. You get a ride to the top of the mountain, you get dropped off, and then you just take a stroll or a hike or a walk down, because all the levadas have pathways along them, because the fact that they're using this system to bring down the water, you have to keep the conduits clean, and if there's repair work that needs to be done. But people now will walk along, and if some trash or something gets in there, they'll actually take it out. And so now a lot of the tourists are actually helping to maintain the system. And you can see here how spectacular some of the landscapes would be, walking along the system of aqueducts.
So the sources of this water is just like springs coming out of the mountaintops. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and probably maybe some, and rain falling on the mountains.
Right. Wow.
You can see here, here's the aqueduct here. So here's somebody, walking along it. And there were many temples built and dedicated to many gods, and gardens and places of exercise. So it's, in a way, kind of interesting that in the Azores and Madeira today, you find almost echoes. I call it echoes of Atlantis. And the stone, which was used in the work, they quarried from underneath the center island and from underneath the zones on the outer as well as the inner side. One kind was white, another black, and a third red. And here we can see some of the different kinds of stones making up the islands.
Yep.
I'm not sure of the lithology of these stones. I imagine we'd have to get samples and get them tested, but I'm sure we've got some basalts, some dark basalts, possibly some other basalts with a lot of iron oxides in it, perhaps some limestones. But the point is here is we have rocks that are red, we have rocks that are white, and we have rocks that are black, composing these islands, again, as Plato described. So yes, this is the Azores today. And of course, these are just the tops of these mountains. And if we were looking at some of what we were seeing in the last couple of weeks with the isostatic changes in the ocean floor, the eustatic changes in sea level, we might be looking at a fairly large island here with some pretty darn impressive mountains. Right. But this is what you have in the Azores today. I mean, these are impressive valleys. Then, as Plato describes, the whole country was said by him to be very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea. And that's pretty much what we've got there.
Right out of the water.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you start getting into the details of the thing, I mean, so far, what we've seen is his geography is consistent, his geology is consistent, his timing, his chronology is consistent. I don't think we need to go to these other places, because I think the thing we started out with was showing that at one point, the geological community closed ranks and said, it's all a myth, it's fiction. We quoted from Atlantis, Fact or Fiction. It was published, 77 or 78, where they declared authoritatively that Atlantis was just fiction and that it was inconsistent with the geology. And so because we could rule out the geology of it, then all other considerations that might be linguistic or having to do with legends or folklore or from vegetation, any of the other things that might have been like part of Ignatius Donnelly's 13 propositions. Remember what they did? The tactic was to say, well, he had 13 propositions, showing that there were these interesting linkages on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. and that these linkages could all be dismissed if the geology was not consistent. So I think we need to plan a trip to this place. Now check this out, Russ. I want a picture of you standing up here
I'll do it.
on this promontory.
I'm down. I'm totally down to do that.
You're down with that?
Oh yeah. I'll
No,
go.
you're up.
Yeah. I'm down to get up there.
So check it out. On its long side, he's describing the island of Atlantis, the main island. On its long side, it extended for 3,000 stades, and as measured from the sea, it was over 2,000 stades across. Now, a stade is about, say, 608 feet. So if you're going 3,000 times that, you're looking at about 345 miles, right? So
Okay.
you're looking at he's talking about an oblong here that's roughly 3,000, what they say, 345 miles by roughly 200 and some miles. So 3 units long, 2 units wide. And he's talking about the plain that was south of the mountain range. So here I've just put a box in here of that particular size that he's describing.
Okay.
So you've got mountain range to the north, you've got the plain to the south, and then you've got the seamounts here, the sunken seamounts with their truncated tops. So this is actually pretty consistent with the size that he describes. So again, the surrounding mountains were celebrated for their number and size and beauty, far beyond which still exist. So try to imagine what this would have looked like if the whole plateau was at sea level or above.
Right.
This would have been
Yeah, those mountains would have been enormously tall, and then
enormously tall. Yeah, and I mean, these are some of the mountains that are there today, and these are just the tops of the mountains.
right. God.
Having in them also many wealthy villages of country folk. These are some of the towns.
Wow.
Here's Teixeira.
So when do we get the plane tickets? This
Yeah.
is too tempting here. Damn,
Oh,
I want to go.
Yeah, here's another Levada, another one of the aqueducts. Looks like a pretty awesome place, doesn't it?
It does. Mike, buy the plane tickets tomorrow.
We're leaving tomorrow on a plane.
I know.
So
Reroute.
now, okay, here's another interesting detail that Plato describes. He says, in the sacred precincts of Poseidon, there were bulls at large, and the 10 princes hunted after the bulls with staves and nooses, but with no weapon of iron. So what I've got here is a picture of the capturing bulls for sport on Teixeira today, which is a regular thing they do, with nooses and staves and using no weapons of iron. So that's why I call this like echoes of Atlantis.
Echoes.
Is this the Spanish province?
Portugal.
Portuguese, okay.
Yeah. Yep. And this is the Canaries. And interestingly, on the Canaries, we find stepped pyramids. And here's an example of an ancient stepped pyramid, and I have no idea how old these things are. I haven't been able to find any studies on them yet. But you see these stepped pyramids on the Canary Islands, which would have been the closest cluster of islands to the Azores Plateau. So if you had a maritime culture centered on the main island there at the Azores, in the region of the Azores, the Canaries would have been outlying islands that would have been immediately accessible to any culture that had any kind of maritime capabilities and navigational skills at all. And then we see exactly the same kind of step pyramids in Sicily. Step pyramid in Sardinia. And we'll save this for our next one. When we talk about the city plan of Atlantis, I'll save this along with the discussion of the recat structure.
Right.
and this is interesting in itself, but I think we'll save that.
All right. Excellent job, Randall. Thank you. I've been
Thank
waiting
you guys
for those pictures of the Azores for like the past 6 episodes.
What we need is our own original photographs, drone footage, video footage, and so on. I mean, clearly there is a documentary here waiting to be made.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because people are making documentaries on Atlantis, and I think they're kind of going off in a lot of directions. And let's get back to Plato.
We better do it before somebody else sees this.
Well, we've now established our priority to this, right? By doing this, we have time-stamped dates. So, somebody comes out trying to claim this is their original work, which I'm sure somebody will try to do. Seems consistent.
Likely.
Doesn't matter. I mean, you can see like I said, I started putting this together in the late 80s and the early 90s. And most of this material, with a few exceptions, I gathered and collected between the late 80s and the mid 90s when I was doing most of the work on this. And I first read Plato's dialogues in the early 70s.
There we are. Sorry about that.
It's okay, guys.
Well, it's an outstanding compilation of work, that's for sure.
Thank you, Brad.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's see. You guys can get a hold of us, all of us here, Kosmographia1618@gmail.com. Let's see. The website will be up soon. The podcast feed is up, and we're still working on getting those episodes out. So
That's my job.
yeah, by the time you hear this, hopefully we'll have gotten up to this episode, so you should be good to go.
Definitely.
Let's see. Also, there's a Twitter at Kosmographia. All this is all at Kosmographia with a K. And also, there is a Patreon where you guys can support the podcast, which is so help us get better equipment, better video abilities, but also mostly help support Randall so that he can do more field work.
And Brad and I are talking about some various perks that we can provide. I want to right here take this. I'll do a written thank you, but I do want to thank everybody so far who has contributed to the Patreon. I want all of you guys to understand and know that it's very much appreciated. And if we can get some resources at our disposal, I think we could kick this thing to a whole nother level.
Yes.
And that is at patreon.com/Randall Carlson.
That's right.
I'm gonna swap from the earlier advertisements. Very few though they were that said patreon.com/Kosmographia. It's now /Randall Carlson, as
Right.
it should be. So
Right. So that it's clear.
that's the place to find it now. Yes.
All right. Good deal. Well, I think that's it, guys. Anything else you guys could think of?
Ooh, chew on that for a week.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Break out Google Earth and lots more.
We haven't even gotten to the Perry Reese map yet.
No, we haven't, have we? But that certainly would come under the heading of Kosmographia. That's, the cosmography is in the more, classical definition, covers geology, astronomy, and geography, and affiliated areas of interest and research. So we will be getting into all that kind of stuff.
With cartography, right?
With cartography, exactly. So
All right.
I want everybody to keep our fingers crossed that we're not about to get embroiled in a big war in the Middle East with Iran. That could be very counterproductive.
Yeah.
And it's something we don't need to do, but it's topical right now. I think I just saw that Iran captured a ship in the Straits of Hormuz. So the tensions are building. And we don't need to widen the war in the Middle East. So I hope everybody listening to this thinks about, the direction of our country and where we're going to be going in the next few years, because a war with Iran could prove to be very disastrous. It could bring in bigger powers like Russia.
Yep.
We don't need any of that. We do not need any of that.
Do not.
No, we don't.
We just, we need to get the hell out of there, actually, is what we need to do.
Yeah.
and let those people sort out their problems, which they can do once we're out of there.
Those people have been fighting that war, fighting themselves for 10,000 years, literally.
Yeah,
10,000
so
years.
they need to resolve their issues.
That's
and,
right.
and we're not helping.
No, we're not.
No. So on that note,
Let's go to space.
Yeah.
I like that. I'd much prefer that. Yep.
Yeah.
Have a safe trip, guys.
Okay.
And again, all the people wanting to hear some discussion of the recap structure in Atlantis, it's coming next.
Next episode.
Stick around. Episode 9.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Right.
This is Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast.